everybody, to the UFC 271 Whitaker versus Adesanya rematch pre-show breakdown edition of the Fight Plug. I'm Efren Gonzalez. Of course, I'm joined with Brandon Anaya. Brandon, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, sir. Thank you. How are you?
Doing all right. Thanks for joining me. We are recording this on a Tuesday night. And hopefully, if you're listening to this, you're probably catching this on a Wednesday evening or Thursday morning. If it's Monday, if it's after the event, I don't know the fuck you're doing here. You should probably be listening to our post show breakdown. That'll be coming out after the event. But otherwise, thank you for joining us. Before we get into all of the action and excitement that UFC 271 has in store for us, and there's quite a bit of that, we want to go ahead and take a minute to recap what happened this past Saturday at Ultimate Fight Night 200. We got to recap a Sean Strickland fight that happened this past weekend. Sean Strickland gets it done. It takes all 5 rounds, all 25 minutes to get the decision over Jack Hermansson. He does that with not a lot of tools, or at least only the necessary tools. A good jab, decent movement, solid cardio, and great takedown defense was enough to get it done against Jack Hermansson. But interestingly enough, it still ended up being a split decision because of Sal D'Amato
Yeah,
gave
Saudi Amato was the guy.
3 rounds to Jack Hermansson. Could you put yourself in Sal D'Amato's head for a little bit and justify
I,
that in any way?
I was just thinking though, like it's so crazy just because of how much I've watched like boxing and MMA. Like I'll be getting older and like or like say I like something happened and like I forget like a lot of things tomorrow. For some reason his name there should be family members and stuff that I've met in past and are like I should know I would know Saudi Amato and like his exploits more than like some of my random cousins and shit I've met. I would like, oh, this guy's your cousin. I'm like, hey dude, like yeah, you guys actually went to school. No, but like I could be like on my deathbed and I'm just like fucking Saudi Amato, man, that guy's wild. Like that'll be one of the thoughts.
Sal D'Amato. Oh my,
Yeah,
my audio is hella peaking. My bad.
yeah,
Sal
it's fine.
D'Amato stays infamous for
Yeah.
bad judging in mixed martial arts, and luckily Sean Strickland still ended up on the right side of this
Mhm.
decision because he won that fair and square. I think where it really fell apart for Jack Hermansson was his inability to get that fight down. I want to say he went like 0 for 7 or 8, probably
Yeah, he's had a
more.
rough go grappling lately. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sean Strickland, yeah, like I said, he got it done in a decision. He called for a title fight afterwards. He did mention a couple
He
other
did.
people's names. You know, he got Sean Strickland's been getting a lot more attention recently.
Viral because
Under,
of the yeah.
understandably, yeah. Whether it's for his salacious or controversial public comments, um, whether he's doing some pretty bad role play, like domestic violence fantasy role play with porn stars on Twitter, or openly admitting that he used to idolize Nazis and shit like that. Like he's
Yeah.
I
You
don't
couldn't tell by looking at him, but
no,
I mean, now
not at
that you
all.
say that, now that you say that, yeah.
He definitely breaks the mold. Um, do you, whether or not you think any of that stuff is legit coming from Sean Strickland, do you think that he might be misrepresenting what kind of a fighter that he actually is to some of the more
Yeah.
kind of casual fan base who might be tuning in because they learned about him because of those comments?
Right. Yeah, and that's something that's kind of weird because you see other fighters who like I don't want to say the opposite because there's guys like who play it like Kobe or guys like that that have that kind of but a lot of those guys can mask some of their down like Masvidal for instance like you can kind of mask your shortcomings if with that persona with that it doesn't get talked about as much picked apart and because fights are so short it's not like football where there's 4 quarters of tape every freaking like you are who you are you can talk all the trash you want but like there's an hour's worth of tape on you every day
Mm-hmm.
with a fight, you know what I mean? Like Ben Askren, that's like 5 seconds, but like
Yeah,
his whole career's off of that. So uh, it would be good for Strickland to, I don't know, but how much of it is organic and that's really just him. And, you don't want to mess with someone
good point.
like,
Yeah,
but I just think, you know, like you were saying, like it does misrepresent, because when you go out there and you see the fight and it's just like, oh, it's clean, this is
Yeah,
clean. But
because
a lot of people wouldn't realize it because they're like, oh, I'm gonna go check out that neo-Nazi dude.
yeah, he
And
was
then
talking about wanting to be the first person to kill someone in the
yeah,
cage and shit, and he's
right.
got demons, like.
Yeah.
So like I feel like that particular type of fan, I feel like they'll expect a certain type of result if you talk a certain talk. Like you mentioned Colby Covington, and I feel like Colby Covington kind of played it kind of smart with the fan base that he tapped into.
Hmm.
Granted,
Perfect
there's
example.
there's plenty of overlap between his fan base and Sean Strickland's fan base,
Yeah,
but
you
I
would think so.
I think the fan base that Colby Covington tapped into has definitely demonstrated that they're willing to kind of like stay on board the bandwagon, even in the face of pretty obvious factual like results to the contrary of what their belief is. Like say a president losing an election, you know what I mean? They're still gonna ride with him because
Yeah,
they just kind of picked a side. And
yeah.
even if the results,
Tribal.
yeah, exactly, the results all that matter, in that case, I guess. But when it comes to Sean Strickland, and what he's the kind of what have you done for me lately kind of atmosphere of mixed martial arts, I feel like that's not necessarily going to be enough to put him over the edge or punch his ticket to that title fight that he wants, especially since the middleweight division seems to be kind of slim pickings as far as
Right.
your ability to get a fight in the top 10 right now. On the next event, we have Jared Cannonier versus Derek Brunson. They're booked
Yeah.
against each other. Um, Marvin Vittori is a teammate of Sean Strickland's, although Sean Strickland doesn't really strike me as a guy who's going to let something like being a teammate like stop him from fighting somebody. Um,
Right.
I feel like Marvin Vittori might be a little bit too far back in the ranks. You know what I mean? He's riding a one fight win streak versus Sean Strickland, who has, I believe, 5 wins at 185 over arguably better competition than what Marvin Vittori's put together at this point. Despite the fact that Marvin Vittori's been at the top of the mountain, he's challenged for the title. He's had some higher profile fights that he's come up on the wrong end of. I think that Sean Strickland might have to kind of sit on the shelf a little bit or fight back in the rankings. Do you think that there's like a key opponent or a standout opponent that would be good for him right now? Is it Marvin Vittori?
I it's like that's the only name that really made sense when you listed it, and then when you were looking, I was like kind of shuffling, and um, Hermanson and Cannonier fought right not too long ago,
Mm-hmm.
so I mean it would be interesting to see who, and I think there's a reason why they had these matchups this close together, because you're gonna have that weight class is kind of going to be in the spotlight these last 2 weeks with that, and with fights this week and with Strickland last week. So it would be interesting to see who fights or how
Yeah.
the fights turn out with Brunson, and because I don't know, like a Brunson Strickland fight, does that make sense, or like I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just not too many guys on the tail end of the top 10, like that
Right.
6 through 10 range, who have the who they definitely have name brand value, but they don't really have a winning streak that's kind of like lending themselves. Like Gastelum. Gastelum is a guy
Mm-hmm.
who is sitting at number 8, and he's on like a 4 or 5. I think he's lost like 5 of his last 6 fights. Dude's
But
like
if he fought
in a
Sean
bad way.
Strickland though, it would be like, okay, I would still watch it.
I
I
think
would
he
still
could
watch
definitely still make it a fight.
it. Hmm.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where I see. I think one of the more interesting matchups, and this is a guy who definitely also doesn't deserve it either, but I think Paulo Costa would be an interesting fight for Sean Strickland.
Hmm.
Um,
That'd be a good one.
because in
That's just to throw it in there, and that's two sociopath type dudes. Like that'd be interesting to see how that lead up goes to that. But Costa's like way far away on contract, like talks and stuff like that, right? Is that what?
I don't know what the current state of his contract is.
Yeah,
But now that you mention it, that's definitely a guy who I can see being more than willing to test the waters of free agency. He's played
right.
like the bad boy before and threatened to
Yeah.
pull out of fights and just
With
decide
the
I'm not
jean
going to make
jacket
weight.
all walking out.
Yeah, it's a guy who pops his collar.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus Christ, that would be a good one. But you bring that up, that'd be a good fight. I'd like to see that one
I
if you
just
can just match them up and throw them in there.
Yeah, I think Sean Strickland's really good. I
He
think
is.
that I think I could see him beating either Jared Cannonier or Derek Brunson. Those are not that those would be easy fights for him. I think they have good enough wrestling to be more of a factor than Jack Hermanson was. I think his biggest tests in middleweight would be the consensus 1A and 1B guys that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Israel Adesanya and Robert Whitaker. Those are the only guys who I can't see like a very clear path to victory for him. Um, but as far as Paulo Costa, I think he fights just dumb enough to make it interesting. You know what I mean? He's durable.
Right, right.
He's durable enough that he's not just going to get shut down with a jab by Sean Strickland. So I think he has potential to make that an interesting fight.
No, that's true. And I think that, whatever Sean Strickland does between with it, just what he says and like the current culture of things, you know what I mean, with other people in the UFC right now, it's like you got to be careful with that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
more or less than before. You would think, something like that would play, but who knows? I mean, it's fighting. They're not going out to dinner together or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
it would just be interesting to see who they ended up matching him up with.
So do you think the UFC should kind of take make some attempt to kind of get Sean Strickland to clean up his act a little bit? I don't know that
I
Dana.
don't think so.
I don't
I
know that.
don't think so, but
Uh-huh.
it would be it would be good for him to kind of take a different tack to play politics to get the fight you want. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But what are you gonna do? That's you kind of paint yourself in a corner with that kind of stuff. So like, do you keep doing it, or how does that work out?
I'd be really curious to see the numbers, the engagement. You know, what kind of views that someone like Sean Strickland is pulling. That's just not something that we're privy to, or that we're probably going to be privy to.
Right.
But I think who knows? Maybe people who own every Purge movie on DVD are probably really showing up for Sean Strickland. You know what I mean? All right, man. We can go ahead and move on to UFC 271. You don't want to spend too much time on Ultimate Fight Night 200 because there's a lot to talk about at UFC 271, or at least a lot to talk at length about.
Like I think just before we transfer, I think Alvy's just a couple fights away. I put that out on Twitter. I think we should just chill. You know what I mean? Guys have come back from a lot worse than this, and he's maybe one or two fights away from being a marketable guy. So let's not give up on Sam Alvey.
Yeah, the turning radius on that career, super sharp. You know, he could turn around at any point. Sam Alvey really, really trying to set records. Sam Alvey with this recent loss just tied the record for most UFC consecutive UFC losses. Do you know? You want to take a guess of who he tied it with?
It wasn't Cowboy Cerrone. Was it Cowboy Cerrone?
Consecutive losses.
Oh, consecutive.
I want to say
losses, no.
I think Cowboys at 5, possibly 6. So that's close. It's a good guess. I
Cowboy has every record known to man, so I just figured he's any record with no, you can throw it down.
Yeah, Cowboy is like the equivalent of just like marking C on your test all the way down.
Yeah,
that's
Jeopardy square eater.
That's not a bad guess, but it was he's tied BJ Penn's consecutive losses at 7.
What did you have to bring?
And that's an ongoing conspiracy theory about why they're keeping Sam Alvey around in the UFC. Is they are trying to get him to take the record, or to claim the record of most losses in the UFC at 8. That way, when someone looks for that BJ Penn, the beloved BJ Penn's name won't show up.
Beloved by me.
Exactly.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So now it won't embarrass, or not embarrass.
That's such a level of pain that I didn't realize I had still. Man, I'm seeing that guy, man. Dang.
So you should actually be celebrating Sam Alvey and hope that he breaks that record.
I crowbarred him in.
That's true. That's true. That was a big ass crowbar to get me to talk about Sam Alvey, dude. All right. Can we move on now to UFC 271?
Please. Yeah.
Robert Whitaker steps into the cage in Houston, Texas this Saturday in hopes to reclaim his middleweight title against the current champion, Israel Adesanya. They last fought in 2019, and Israel Adesanya got it done in the second round by KO. Arguably got it done at the end of the first round by KO, because Robert Whitaker was definitely saved by the bell in that instance. I think he was like pretty close to out. But yeah, do you see this fight going any differently? Better question, actually. Has this fight's kind of been in flux for a little bit. Everybody kind of
Mhm.
knew this was the next fight for a while, but it was never like officially announced, and then it kind of got announced late. Would you say that your excitement for this fight or your hype for this fight has gone up since that was the clear next fight, or did it start high and then kind of go down?
I think it started high and went down because it gave me more of a chance because I was just like, Rob's gonna get this one. Like this is what, and it's gonna like push out this like we had just saw with like Brandon Moreno. Like it's gonna be a third fight we want to see. You know, it's gonna be like one for, and then you start watching, and then you see like Rob's good, but I think he's gonna get. I was like, I think not even that long ago, I thought he would win, or I would take him to win it. And then the more you think about it, the more you kind of you're like, man, I think he's gonna. It's gonna be one of those highlight things for Adesanya
Franza.
more likely than not. Yeah.
Yeah, my faith in Robert Whitaker in this fight has kind of only gone down with like the
Mm.
longer this fight is kind of was up in the
Exactly.
air. Um, it sounds like he wants to outstrike Israel Adesanya still, and I don't think that that's the right choice.
Right. And given that Israel Adesanya's on steroids, it's like, man, are you really gonna be able
Al-
to do this, dog? Like, because he's great. Like
Allegedly,
Israel
allegedly.
Adesanya is great,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, all of the things that, um, like you hear about are true. Like when you see him fight, you can go watch, and it's been for years. It's kickboxing, it's everything. It just comes at you fast, and you can and he's on steroids now. So, like,
Allegedly.
how is Robert Whitaker gonna like? And I love Robert Whitaker, and I thought he could win, and that's what I was thinking about too, because when all these lead ups, you go back and you kind of watch like the splash reels of these guys to like get you going to like remind you, jog your memory of like what they've done in the past and the fights they've had, and then their fights together, and then you're like, oh dang, like why does that guy got a titty? You know what I mean? And then you're like, oh, that's right,
So
on some substance or whatever. So that's gonna be hard for Whitaker to like you put it that together and to fight like arguably one of the greatest strikers, you know, in recent history. Last, I mean, 5 to 10 years, he's been up there. So it's gonna be tough for Rob to get by this
Israel Adesanya has actually tasted defeat uh,
one.
between now and his previous fight with Robert Whitaker at the hands of Jan Blachowicz up at light heavyweight. What about what Jan Blachowicz was able to do with Israel Adesanya and getting the W there? Does any of that game plan or any of that blueprint look like anything that Robert Whitaker would be able to exploit or utilize to kind of get the same results over Israel Adesanya? Or do you think you would benefit
It's
from
just
trying to
mass.
recreate that?
It's just body mass. It's just really body mass, and the way that he's built, Jan Blachowicz is built was it's just sometimes it's just because Adesanya is really good at in welterweight. You've seen him in scrambles or getting in like a wrestling situation. He's strong.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? He's strong and he's able to get out. It's kind of weird, like
Mm-hmm.
dang, you're kind of skinny, but how are you so strong in this moment to get that guy off you? Like,
Do you think
what is it
maybe
that you're doing that?
steroids,
Yeah.
possibly? Where's this?
Why?
Where's this steroid stuff? Israel Adesanya steroid stuff really coming from? Is
No.
it
Oh,
from the
but
titty?
it's yeah, dude. Because like I was tripping out on that the other day because he's in his 30s, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
he's been fighting in one way or another for a long time, and then like he's never had weight problems. Do you know what I mean? Like not to say like I'm no one to talk to about anybody having weight problems, but I know like I've lost like huge amounts of weight, and I've gained huge amounts of weight in like really like kind of fluctuating times,
Mm-hmm.
and I've gotten um like blood profiles and stuff, and it does mess with your hormones doing that one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And like so if you were to see massive weight swings in a guy and then him have gynecomastia, then you'd be like, okay, well, his, something. But the
Mm-hmm.
dude's been basically the same weight. But then you go into the UFC and you have to fight other men in a cage to like, you know what I mean? And then that happens out of nowhere. And then I've also smoked a ton of weed like since I was in like the eighth grade. So like I know that has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
If it was more of a hormonal thing,
Mm-hmm.
that's anecdotal, but come on, dude.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think like him and John Jones, like that hatred they had, it was probably because they like both of
Might have
those motherfuckers knew.
driven
They're
home
like,
to.
bro, I know what you're doing. And he's like, no, you don't. You don't
Mm,
know what I'm doing, dog. Like that's
yeah.
probably what it was.
Got to get on that level.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Interesting take. I just wanted to
Sorry,
kind of see where the.
that's so weird. But I really didn't think about it. I really didn't think about it until like, so we talked about when we were gonna do this and like do the breakdown or what we were gonna do the breakdown first and what date, and then so I wanted to go back and just watch stuff, and most of it is like highlights and stuff like that, and then a few different things I watch like you do, where they break it down and stuff, and it wasn't even a topic of conversation, but it was like they had that where it was where they had those photos of them and stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, what the heck? Like they don't know, and no one even talks about that because with USADA and everything else, that was such a huge issue back. But
Mhm.
I think he just kind of, what did he say? It was weed or whatever it was, and then
I don't.
like no one ever talked about it, right?
I don't remember what he attributed it to. It wasn't weed.
Yeah.
But I think he kind of just kept it up in the air. He said, "Yeah, I have a growth. I'm getting it checked out. We're looking into it." You know,
Chill, dog. Like I
yeah.
know what this looks like 99% of the time,
Which
but
is about as measured of a response as
you
you would
should
hope
take.
to
Yeah.
get from anybody. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, it just tripped me out, and then maybe it's the wrong like thing to get caught up on, but
Hmm.
I guess just for me, like that's kind of an obvious thing, and
Allegations of steroid use aside, though, I don't necessarily feel like that's going to be
it couldn't
like
matter
if
at all.
I no, I
He
mean
would beat him without it, and he
Rob and
probably did.
yeah, and Robert
I'm not saying that's
Whitaker's
the only thing.
fought the likes of Yoel Ramiro, who I mean, I was kind of going back and rewatching some of Robert Whitaker's highlights also, and he's such an underrated counterpuncher. The
Mm,
guy can box while moving backwards so well, and he's
sure,
caught so
sure.
many dudes doing that. I think he's probably like the best at it, arguably. I think he's just inactive enough that we literally forget. And in some of his more recent outings, like the Darren Till one, sticks out to me so much because it was just such a measured fight. I would say that Darren Till fight actually, I mean, as overrated as Darren Till is, you know what I mean? That guy's definitely getting the UFC push to stay, higher in the rankings than he arguably deserves to be. But I think that was, the kind of measured approach that Robert Whitaker would need to make it a boring loss against Israel
Mm-hmm.
Adesanya. Um,
Right.
I think what he really needs to do is take the fight to the ground. That's not necessarily Robert Whitaker's MO, and I think it's going to be tougher than I alluded to, like as far as the comparisons to Jan Blachowicz, considering that Robert Whitaker used to fight at welterweight.
Right.
So like you said, it's the mass that's the thing. It's a game plan that's probably going to be fruitful, but ultimately we'll see why it worked out better for Jan Blachowicz.
Yeah, and that was one man. That was such a crazy card, because and I had expected to lose so much money on that one on the Aljamain Sterling fight, which I do not know why I bet on Aljamain that week, but I always bet on him. I think I've told you that before, and I didn't want to like bad juju it and not bet on him, but that's like the worst guy to bet against. And then when Adesanya, I was showing my buddies, I was like, God, they're like, you bet against, like, because I think a lot of guys just watching it looks like, the highlights and the walkouts and all that stuff. Like, oh, how did you bet against this guy? But like, dude, he's just like he's built like someone who's gonna hold you down,
Hmm.
and then the other guy was built to do that.
Yeah.
That's his basic anatomy, I guess.
Hmm.
So I don't think it was anything special that anyone could do, and it does kind of like that whole John Jones Adesanya fight train went way down, like way downhill after that. So
Completely out of the picture. Yeah.
it actually went like so far the other way.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, it was basically that's pretty much it. That it was just a mass thing, and I don't think Rob has that. And that's what you make like a really good point. Like thinking back, like, and he could wrestle anyone, Robert Whitaker, but
Hmm.
like that functional wrestling where you were like moving forward on a guy who's gonna like get out of the way and not want to be in your way,
With
it's
his
gonna it's
yeah,
a lot harder.
with Israel Adesanya, you definitely need to set up your shots with strikes, and that's
Hmm.
where it gets so dangerous. Because I mean, I feel like Robert Whitaker's was more a counterpuncher, and
Yeah,
across 25 minutes, I think that's a tall order. I feel like
yeah,
Israel Adesanya is, like I said, he's been busier since their last fight, and I think he's probably only gotten sharper. I think Israel Adesanya also probably recognizes some more threats on the horizon, some former opponents of his that the UFC is obviously trying to build
push
up.
up. Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I think Adesanya is just much more aware of the target that's on his back, and what he needs to maintain and holding that title. Also, I think Israel Adesanya. I think this might be the last fight on his contract. I think he might be in a similar situation as Francis Ngannou. I don't, not that to say that he's like looking to get out of his contract or ride it out or do
no,
anything like Francis Ngannou's doing. Um, but as far as negotiating goes, obviously, he's got a lot more to lose than Robert Whitaker at this point. And Robert Whitaker, in interviews, like I said, he's kind of been um, he hasn't been he's been very forthright about the fact that he didn't really enjoy being champion the first time around. You know what I
hmm,
mean? He didn't like the extra pressure. He didn't like all the extra duties, having to do with media and all that stuff. Um, if he has a different hunger for it this time around, obviously this time he's the one who's challenging for the title, whereas the last time he was defending it. Well, I think Israel Adesanya went into that fight as an interim champion. But I think that there's something to be said for challenger Robert Whitaker versus kind of dejected
wow,
title holder Robert Whitaker. I mean, that could be a
yeah,
factor as well. So Brandon, uh,
yes,
Derek Lewis steps into the cage against Tai Tuivasa this Saturday in the co-headliner or the co-main event. And this card is in Houston, Texas, Derek Lewis's hometown. The last time he fought in Houston, Texas, was against Cyril Gahn. Derek Lewis was very upfront about the fact that fighting in his hometown kind of got to him. The pressure affected him. I don't think that fighting outside of his hometown was going to make that fight go any different against Cyril Gahn. But we're coming back to Houston, Texas, another Derek Lewis fight, a chance for him to redeem himself against another guy who's going to bring it, who's going to stand and bang. He's not going to bring anything as exotic on the feet as Cyril Gahn. Do you think that that's something that's going to factor in, or is that something that you've thought about when you're looking at, say, betting lines?
like from a betting perspective, one thing I learned is like to try and not like those are what you brought up was all good and like measured points and stuff, but you kind of think about it from like, okay, if Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa were fighting in just a random place, like if they're fighting on Fight Island, Abu Dhabi, where it's like a freaking laboratory almost, where it's like built to do it, okay, who would you have? And then you can kind of like factor back and forth, like what one guy's going through versus what one guy isn't mentally. But if you get too caught up in like what one guy's going into, you kind of like start like tricking yourself into like thinking like this is definitely going to happen, and then you're like making fan fiction in your head about like Derek, he probably broke up with his girlfriend because he couldn't get her enough tickets for the family. Like you start thinking about that stupid shit, and you just throw yourself off. So you just kind of got to do it like a weighted and measured approach to it. At least that's what I would say. Getting too caught up in like, but it is kind of that's one thing about fighting that the home and away difference is so like that's kind of it kind of gets washed almost.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because most cases it's an away game for these guys, but
Yeah, for both fighters too. Yeah, like
yeah,
it's not like every single card one guy's the hometown guy and the other
right,
guy's not. Like it honestly, most of the time they're just fighting whoever the fuck the UFC's happens to be,
yeah,
at that point.
right,
So yeah, that's an interesting point. In a vacuum, how do
yeah.
you feel about this fight or how it plays out between Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa without without paying any mind to the hometown or advantage or disadvantage?
I just think he has that freak power, and like that both of these guys do. But I think Derek just has that. He's just a little. It's just cranked up a little bit more, and he's done it in like much bigger spots, in much at much crazier times
Mm-hmm.
than Tai Tuivasa has. And we talked about that in our last. We almost like kind of talked this fight into existence in one of our previous spots, which is
We
crazy
did, yeah.
because we said, oh well, let's see what happens with this. Tai Tuivasa or Derek Lewis fight coming up, and then obviously this is what happened.
Hmm.
And I think they're kind of putting Ty in that spot now with the whole full send deal, and he's like that's a big like marketing portion of it. They're kind of putting him in there, and I think that might be a little bit more to his head than it would be for Derek being at home,
Hmm.
because it's kind of like, dang, I'm not going to do this again. And Derek's been in some like he's been in almost every type of fight you can have. He's had like some stinkers. He's had some like decisions. He's had some like come from behind wins. So he's been in like all those different situations. Whereas Ty might have in the bigger spots too, as where Ty's kind of coming into it. Not knowing what's going on, but there's a ton of marketing and push behind him now
Yeah.
that he maybe wasn't getting before.
Good point. Derek Lewis is definitely lost under brighter lights. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I think he's probably adjusted to that.
That
And
tinge and yeah.
and I mean, if you're already lost in front of your hometown embarrassingly once, it's got to be
Yeah.
easier. You know what I mean? Or the
Right.
idea of that happening has got to be a little bit easier. The first cut's the deepest in that regard.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I that's a good point. I think going into this, that was a factor. It wasn't enough to make me pick Tai Tuivasa. I think Tai Tuivasa is a little too hittable. I think the best thing to do with Derek Lewis is to just not be there. Is to not stand in front of the guy. And there's very few dudes in the heavyweight division who I think could stand in front of him and make it a fight. We saw Tai Tuivasa. He got touched up by Greg Hardy a little bit before he turned it around and put the screws to him.
And he was right there in that pocket, just a little too close.
Mhm.
Whereas with Greg Hardy, like you could have kind of moved in and out and scored a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
the fuck do I know? You know what I mean? But
Right. I mean, Derek Lewis, if he can back you up to the cage, you're in fucking danger, no matter who you are. And that's exactly what we saw, like Greg Hardy do to Tai Tuivasa. Now, Tai Tuivasa landed that counter left, and it was good night. But I think Derek Lewis at this point has also demonstrated that he's a lot more durable. He's taken shots from guys who
he's healthier than he's been.
Mhm.
Like from what just from what I've seen, because he's always kind of been dealing with something. It feels like he carries injuries a lot more, and it seems like he's a little. I mean,
Good
you
point.
never really know until the end of the fights. Like no one knew Francis had his knee blown out or whatever it was.
Yeah, there was a little while when it seemed like Derek Lewis was almost like he had stomach problems or he had a rib problem, like he couldn't take shots to the body. Yeah. And I mean, I know he's been open about the fact that he had a lot of back problems, a few years back, but he seems to have alleviated those, or he's just been in short enough fights that it's not been a factor.
Not been a problem, yeah.
So,
and I don't see this one being one of those ones. But see, that's the crazy thing is we're saying that, and then now like Tuivasa is gonna have that karate stance going in and out, and like using, and
so he's gonna come out standing sideways, doing the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson,
jumping in and scoring, and then dipping out. Like, oh man, where'd that come from?
I think that the part that makes it the hardest to envision Tai Tuivasa winning this fight is the fact that he's not. I don't think he's going to do it with one strike. I think he's a guy who's going to have to pile it on. And if he swings at Derek Lewis is going to swing back, and he just doesn't have enough tools in his tool belt to give Derek Lewis any different looks that's going to make Derek Lewis like apprehensive or worry about anything like a takedown. So yeah, it's just a classic battle of two big boys, and one hits harder and has a proven track record of being a little bit more accurate, a little less wild than he used to be anyways. And I mean, Derek Lewis is fucking sneaky agile. Like that guy throws a mean head kick too.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, that's not ever the strike that I'm going to call Derek Lewis to finish a fight with, but it's something else. It's a different look to give to Tai Tuivasa, something else that can throw Tai Tuivasa off of his game. And I think that he's going to put it together.
Yeah. And I might be talking myself into it. And sometimes this is one of those fights where if Tuivasa wins it might be like, dang, how did I not see that? Or how did we not? That was like right in our face, man. His ascent and his rise. We talked about it. Like, we talked about it last fight. We praised him. He did good, and he's a good fighter. He's got a lot going for him. But Derek Lewis has just been through everything, man. Now, is there any way? Do you have Google pulled up or whatever? But like, what are the odds that it goes to decision, and would it be worth betting it? Like at like just a 25 bucks decision,
I like
and
doing
see how
that.
that goes.
I
Yeah.
like. I mean, I'm
You
not.
want to
I'm
do
not
it?
the.
Let's do it together, me and you together.
I'm down. I'm not. I'm not the one. I'm not the better. You know what I mean? But in
Right.
verdict, like that's how I've earned a couple gold belts. Is like by
You have to go
there's
against the grain,
there's
man.
yeah there's money in those fights that where like because it sometimes you can pick the favorite by
Hmm.
decision just and still there's like ton of good money there.
Yeah.
Um, I'm totally down. That'd be fun. Make the
Yeah,
fight a little bit more
just
exciting.
to see. Yeah, just a little ball tingler in the
Hmm.
middle there, just to see. I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do Derek Lewis by decision. Would like I. I'm gonna. I bet you like Taito Ivasa by decision is so unlikely. I bet you that would be such a like a sneaky one just to throw like because like sometimes I'll do that too in the game I'm betting just to keep me like invested in like who scores the first touchdown or who scored the first basket or like after halftime like live betting it.
Well, Brandon, I will let you go. I know it's getting late. I know your family's probably asleep or pissed off that they're not asleep because they hear you talking from the other room.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I'll let you get back to that, man.
yeah. They're hearing about how like picking Jared Cannonier was stupid, and hopefully the tied to Uvasa by decision makes it, and then I like triple the bag, and like no one has to worry about
I
everybody gets Valentine's Day candy.
yes, hopefully me too, man.
Yeah, you'll get something for sure, dog.
Did somebody say sure dog?